The second disaster that I wanted to focus on and put together a slideshow for was the 2011 famine in Somalia. Now, I found this disaster particularly interesting um, because while it was triggered by a natural disaster, which was the drought in the region, um, the famine was ultimately the result of a lack of action. So, in the end, it was really a man made disaster. So, just to give you a bit of an overview, 13 million people were affected by the drought in the eastern Horn of Africa from 2010 to 2011. And ongoing political issues and conflict in Somalia, in addition to rising food prices in the region, led to a devastating famine that caused large scale migration and claimed an estimated 258,000 lives. So now I'll just run through a bit of the timeline to give you an idea of the sequence of events. So in August 2010, the Famine Early Warning Systems Network sent out the first warning of a probable drought in the area. The effects of El Nino, in particular, caused one of the driest October-December rainy seasons ever in the region in 2010. Now, for some of the areas, it was the second or third poor rainy season in a row. So they were really starting to suffer in terms of food supplies and food shortages. The lack of rain meant poor harvests and meager food supplies during the following lean season. Mainly southern Ethiopia, south central Somalia, and northern Kenya were affected by the drought. Now, while the response was late in all three countries, it was ultimately relatively successful in Ethiopia and Kenya, and those two countries were able to avoid famine. Unfortunately, the ongoing level of conflict in Somalia had resulted in aid restrictions, and these were particularly anti-terrorism policies that were targeted at Al-Shabaab, which is what is considered to be a terrorist organization that is in control of a lot of the area. And this really crippled the response efforts. Al-Shabaab denied humanitarian access to certain areas, and the Staff of the World Food Program, which is really the lead organization in regards to food security in the area. Their staff were subjected to numerous attacks, which led to their eventual withdrawal from the country. And warnings of the deteriorating situation actually went on for 11 months before the UN declared famine in parts of Somalia on July 20th, 2011. Afterwards, 4 more areas were added within the following 2 months. So there was really a lot of warning there. There was 11 months that they knew that this situation was imminent, and nothing was really done until late July. But once famine was declared, restrictions were relaxed and organizations were able to start responding appropriately. This included Islamic states, humanitarian agencies, in addition to NGOs and UN agencies. Now, the Islamic states in particular and the Islamic organizations, they actually had a much easier time maneuvering around the country and dealing with the situation there. Somalia being a largely Islamic population or Muslim population. The famine was officially declared ended on February 3rd, 2012. And this was thanks to a good rainy season as well as some of the assistance that was provided. Although there is some debate about how effective the assistance was, but it definitely helped them get to the next harvest. So when it did eventually arrive. And in conclusion, while the early warning system was successful, the lack of timely action security and political cooperation resulted in a failure of the cluster system to prevent a famine in Somalia. The UN has actually admitted that the delay in declaring a state of famine, which helped trigger a greater response, ultimately claimed additional lives. So, had they declared famine sooner, they probably would have been able to garner more of a response earlier. And actually, when famine was declared in those areas, a lot of the different factors that they look at in terms of declaring famine, those thresholds had actually been breached. So malnutrition was far more prevalent. Some populations reporting malnutrition rates of 50% in the children, others reporting 40%. And, for a threshold of famine, it's usually 30% and above. So some of the areas were a lot higher than that by the time help was actually on its way. So one of the things that I found particularly interesting was that I was actually living in Uganda when this happened, which is not too far at all from Somalia. And we didn't hear anything on the news. We had absolutely no idea that it was going on. At the time, there was actually a lot more that was going on in Africa as well. There was the crisis in Egypt, the coup in Cote d'Ivoire. There was the separation of South Sudan, and an upcoming election in Uganda. So I guess the news reports were more focused on that. But it really is shocking to me that this happened. And maybe it's because they're so used to having problems in Somalia that we've just sort of become numb to it as a global community. But yeah, it was really surprising to find out that I was so close and yet had no idea. But anyways, thank you for listening. Okay, and these are my references. They're also included in the blog post.